most companies don't really consider the individual channels and what the mechanics are of those channels.
You produce a piece of content, then you decide how to distribute it.
The challenge of working on platforms that are massively saturated and controlled almost now by AI, having the human visible at the heart of your content is where the opportunity sits.
What is the alternative? The alternative is to get no reach, get no engagement, and have to be honest, a poorly performing marketing function.
So today we're going to talk about how to develop a channel-first content strategy. We're going to look at the problems of the more traditional, conventional approach to content, and we're going to get into some of the specific channels in terms of what works and what doesn't, where the greatest opportunities are, and then we'll wrap up with some key takeaways. So if we start with the main problem, most organizations that are investing in content will start with the content itself. That could be a webinar, podcast, a guide, a report. The next step is to typically look at how they can distribute the content across the conventional channels. Whilst that repurposing approach makes kind of logical sense, most companies don't really consider the individual channels and what the mechanics are of those channels.
You produce a piece of content, then you decide how to distribute it. And to a degree, that used to work. Back when I started my career, for example, you could produce a webinar and publish it on your website, on LinkedIn, and via a newsletter, and you get the response that you wanted. But these days, those channels have become so much more specialist in nature, haven't they? You know, ultimately, to be successful on LinkedIn now, you need to produce content specifically for LinkedIn that meets its own algorithm. It's the same with YouTube as well, though, isn't it? You know, they have an algorithm which, you know, previously you might have done all right, you know, by dumping your webinar information in there or your webinar recordings in there, and that might get you a certain amount of traction. Email's another one. Previously, you didn't necessarily have to think too heavily in the world of B2B anyway about your email strategy specifically, because as long as you had a decent list, as long as it was clean and you had verified email addresses, you're promoting something that was relevant, you'd get the level of traction that you needed. These days, that's also changed massively. So I think that's the reason why it's just way less effective now. Those platforms have become more specialist.
There's more content being generated by AI now than there is by humans. Everyone's using AI to generate content for things like posts on LinkedIn, and it's become a very low bar now, those sorts of channels. So that's just increased the saturation. We went through a content shock period probably 10, 15 years ago. It's always been a problem, but now it's just an extreme level. So there are still ways you can cut through on LinkedIn, as we'll get into, but there may be other channels that are harder to make use of, but as a result are less competitive and therefore increasingly open up opportunities if you can get it right. So let's look at the sort of 3-step framework that you should consider when you're thinking about any channel. So the first step in that framework is to think about the outcomes that you want to achieve. Each channel will serve different purposes. There may be certain channels that give you better reach and discoverability. There may be other channels that provide better conversion. So the very first step is to think about overall, what are you trying to achieve in your funnel, your content funnel? And there's still, whilst there's a lot of debate around whether funnels exist from a demand generation perspective, because things are never really linear, I think there's still, from a content perspective, you're still trying to move people through a content funnel. You're trying to increase awareness, you're trying to increase discoverability, you're trying to then get connection, familiarity, and ultimately you're trying to convert that interest into some form of engagement that can be followed up on. But the second part of the framework is to then think about the audience for each channel. Every channel will have different types of audiences, and as a viewer or as a consumer of each channel, you probably go to them for different purposes. LinkedIn, you'll go to for very different reasons than you may go to YouTube or Spotify or use your LLMs. Or the final part of the framework is the mechanics of each channel. All the social platforms will have their own algorithms, each work differently, as we'll get into.
The way I think about those mechanics is effectively the rules that you have to play by in order to get any form of engagement, particularly on LinkedIn. If your aim with LinkedIn is to get a lot of inbound traffic to your website and result in conversions, then your strategy is probably a little bit off.
Let's take each channel one by one. I think it's important to say from the outset that we're looking at this from a demand generation perspective. We're looking at how content supports the demand generation process and programs. We're not suggesting that we're experts in YouTube to the point where we would help a content creator create a YouTube channel that generates 100,000 subscribers and would generate a significant, multi-million pound income. That's not what we're talking about. If you're watching this on YouTube, there'll be plenty of videos that will give you that kind of insight. So we're looking at this very much from a B2B demand generation perspective and thinking about how can you shape your content by focusing on the key channels, not just the content itself, to make sure that distribution is the main thing that you're thinking about. So let's start with LinkedIn. So I think the main outcome from LinkedIn really is discoverability and building authority. So the algorithm change that occurred at the sort of end of last year, early this year, 2026, was called 360 Brew. And the main reasons for the change were that a lot of people were gaming the system. Stop the use of engagement pods, stop the use of automation through AI assisted comments, stop the fake followers. So the algorithm now to assess whether a post is worth sharing and worth extending across the wider network beyond your immediate first degree connections. It's not looking so much now at likes and comments. It's much more about dwell time, and it's very centralized now, and it will focus very much on your profile as a starting point. So obviously with AI, it can aggregate a huge amount of information very quickly. It will look at your area of expertise. That's not just in terms of your biography or the about section. It's the history and experience you've had, the skills that you put in there. It also look at previous posts that you've engaged with yourself. So when you're putting together a post to distribute on LinkedIn, all of that needs to be factored and everything needs to be consistent. You really need to be focusing on a niche if you're going to cut through. And the more specific you can be, the more effective you'll be if your content is aligned with that.
Seen some other changes though, haven't we, on LinkedIn that have been happening for a longer, even longer period of time? Like the demise of the company page, for example. These days, you get very little engagement, if any, on a post from the company page. So, this is what we mean by channel first, I suppose, isn't it? That you've first got to establish what works on that channel. So getting a group of people internally that are influential, maybe the leaders of the business, that are happy to post is a first step. Because ultimately, if you're posting through the company page, you're just not going to get any reach at all.
You've got to get your founders, your experts really bought into LinkedIn and maybe position it not as a social media platform, but more as a content distribution network. And that's really what it is today. The types of content now that work really well on LinkedIn, we would say there's probably 4 types of content. And again, this is another change as a result of the algorithm. So the first type of content that's going to really give you reach is when you jump on the back of a new piece of news or something significant that a well-known brand or influencer has been talking about. It's a good tactic to try and look at other channels that might give you that insight ahead of anyone else on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is often late to the party with news. So if you've got feeds from maybe analysts, or if you're maybe tracking X, you might get some breaking news that you can jump on quickly. That's reach content. So that's the first type of content on LinkedIn. The second is authority content. And this is really where you want to be sharing your expertise and your unique perspective on a particular topic, whatever that is, obviously related to the core area of interest for you as a business, as an individual. So authority content is maybe a contrarian view. Maybe it's backed up by some research that you've done that's unique to you. But that is all about building on the newsjacking approach and then just really trying to reinforce your expertise and authority and building that credibility over time. Third is conversion content. And that's really a lot more difficult now with LinkedIn because obviously LinkedIn is suppressing any external links to other websites, etc. So conversion content might often reside on your personal profile, but you can find ways to insert it into posts in clever ways, whether that's asking people to add a comment, requesting a particular framework.
You can achieve the same thing in terms of conversion just by asking people to say "me please" basically in the comments.
Another common one with LinkedIn is newsletters as well. That's another good way of diversifying away from the platform and finding another way to engage with people, but starting that discovery process on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And then the fourth, which has probably been the most prominent approach for a lot of people, before this algorithm change, was to focus heavily on personality or personal content. The cringy posts with pictures of yourself in a restaurant in Spain or whatever that has no bearing on the actual content of the post.
The algorithm used to reward likes and comments, didn't it? And those kind of posts, for some at least, like it or not, did generate likes, comments, etc., because they're personal things which people want to engage with in the way that they would on Facebook.
That's still very much a key part of the process, because you do have to get your personality across. But I think trying to do that in a non-cringy way in a B2B environment is an art in itself.
Well, it's things like, if you've been to a customer dinner, if you've been to an event, and you see them all the time, don't you? People that have met up there playing mini golf, whatever it may be, that is a little bit less serious, a little bit less kind of authority content driven. There are particular types of format because of the algorithm that you just talked through that perform well. Carousels, for example, perform well because people scroll through them. It increases dwell time, which then pleases the algorithm. Video is the same. Video for a long time has always been more effective on LinkedIn than other kind of types of post, but it's for the same reason. That it encourages dwell time because people have to sit and watch that, and therefore pleases the algorithm. So there are, again, another type is the kind of infographic type content that we see a lot these days that's embedded directly within LinkedIn. It's not kind of trying to get people away from LinkedIn as a platform, but it also has enough detail that people need to and want to analyze it, learn from it, and therefore, again, dwell time is increased, pleases the algorithm. So that there is also format discussions, format decisions to be made when we're thinking about LinkedIn as a platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's turn our attention to YouTube. For many B2B companies that are investing in content, YouTube's almost seen as an afterthought. It's often a dumping ground for video content. The channel itself and how it works is never really considered. It's all disjointed. It has no kind of structure. There's no understanding of what the channel is about. And that's what audiences and viewers on YouTube are looking for. If they go to a channel that they're going to subscribe to, they need to have a clear idea what that's about. Each channel has to have its own value proposition. And I think if you're using YouTube in the right way, you're almost thinking about your company or yourself as a media company. Obviously, the bar is very high on YouTube. There's very high quality production. Most of the videos that are successful for most of the content creators that are really successful on YouTube. But that's not to say that it can't be really leveraged from a B2B perspective. Because the bar is so high, it creates an opportunity because there's much less competition than there will be on LinkedIn, where LinkedIn, the bar is much lower and it's quite easy to leverage AI to churn out a load of crappy content. So we really think that not only because of the opportunity there, I think the fact that increasingly your audiences and your targets will be more interested in human-centric content. That's content that the human at the heart of it is very visible. That's going to come through podcasts and through videos.
The reason that just chucking a webinar up there doesn't work is because it's not designed for that platform. And what does work on YouTube is snippets of things. So what we're not saying here is that you should completely not repurpose it or reuse a webinar recording, for example, but editing it in a way that might work well for YouTube Shorts, for example, with a shorter snippet of a piece of video that maybe has subtitles on it, can work really well in Shorts, for example. But there are other ways, aren't there, that we can optimize YouTube as a platform.
Yes, if you think about the outcomes that you want from YouTube, if say you're doing a podcast like this, you'll no doubt have a presence on Spotify, on Apple, and probably other less prominent podcast sites. But where your podcast will really get discovered is through YouTube. And that's typically through, like you say, snippets and short form content. And to an extent, that's the same on LinkedIn. The beauty of YouTube is, though, that you can have long form content. If they're going to spend more time consuming a 30-minute podcast or an hour-long video, they're going to really get to know you and really understand your expertise, and the trust will start to build. It's what Grace Andrews, who was the brains behind the Diary of a CEO, she refers to short form video as the forgettable seconds and the long form as the memorable minutes. So you've really got to have a combination of both, but really to drive people towards more engagement and conversion. The more time they spend with you, the more likely they're going to build that familiarity and trust.
But from a consistency perspective, of course, people are going to subscribe to your channel if they can feel that they're going to receive the next insightful piece of content, whether it's a webinar style or something other, week after week after week after week. And if you're not encouraging that subscription process to happen, then of course YouTube's going to look at how many subscribers you've got, and if it's low, you're not going to get that reach that you're looking for. So simply uploading the odd webinar every 2 or 3 months and a corporate video you did in 2016 is not going to encourage people to subscribe, because they're not therefore reliably going to get the next piece of content, and that is going to limit your reach.
With YouTube, it is about being consistent. The algorithm rewards consistency if you are posting regularly. I think the way the YouTube algorithm works is it is very much about almost how LinkedIn used to work. The first few people that engage, the algorithm will look at the view time, and if it's positive, it will take it to the next level, and then the next level, and it's various levels until you reach that wider audience and you go viral.
Yeah, and I think another thing that people kind of neglect to think about when it comes to YouTube as a channel, because as this podcast is about, they're thinking about the content first, not the channel, is that YouTube is effectively a search engine. At the end of the day, it's a video search engine, but it's a search engine like Google or any other. So I think often people neglect that optimization piece as well, the optimization of the description of the video, the optimization of the channel page itself. Now, all of that seems to not be considered in the same way that SEO would be, despite the fact that it is a search engine in its own right.
Yeah, your thumbnail and the title, how that works together is critical, the hook. And then obviously the content itself, the quality of the presenters, maybe the visuals that go alongside that, it all comes into play if you want to be successful on YouTube. But I think, going back to the earlier point, it really is a missed opportunity for many B2B brands. And I think over time, because of the challenge of working on platforms that are massively saturated and controlled almost now by AI, having the human visible at the heart of your content is where the opportunity sits, and that naturally lends itself to a focus on YouTube.
Look, we're not going to ignore the barriers to entry, are we? They are there. They do exist. Yeah. How many conversations have we had with leaders of businesses that say, no chance are you going to get me behind the camera? But what is the alternative? The alternative is to get no reach, get no engagement, and have to be honest, a poorly performing marketing function. So it's now a non-negotiable thing, in our view, or certainly in mine, to have some form of video content for multiple channels, as you said, LinkedIn and YouTube. So I suppose it's about doing what you can to make it happen.
Talking about declining channels, I think email is probably the next one to focus on.
An email, I think, is slightly different when we're talking about channel first, because what we've talked about until now is thinking about how you produce content for the channel. When we talk about email, the reason that it needs to be channel first is because the world of email is changing, in that it's now much, much harder to get into someone's inbox than it was before. We've got things like privacy filters, spam bots are becoming more sophisticated. It's people's fatigue when it comes to email, and thousands of emails in their inbox is also obviously grown over a long period of time. But it boils down to the fact that it's very, very difficult now to get your email in someone's inbox in a way that they want to read it. Therefore, when we talk channel first from an email perspective, we're talking not about what content you create for that channel, although there is an element to that, but also thinking about how you optimize that channel before you use it. And the reason for that is because ultimately, if you have a poorly optimized email channel, then you could put the best content in the world through it and no one's going to see it. So it's things like trying to optimize your email health, your sender score, your lists, etc., in order to ensure that the effort that you put into producing fantastic content is rewarded by the fact that people are actually going to read it through email. So that's the first thing. But I think there are things, aren't there, that from an email perspective that also matter from a content point of view. And we were literally yesterday having a conversation with a client that's point blank said, if an email looks like a marketing email, I will just scan over it. And so that there are methods there to avoid that. You know, as we've seen, a simpler, plainer looking email with a lot of content baked into it is more effective than the traditional multiple links and loads of images and things like that. This comes down to what we talked about at the beginning. If conversion is your aim with email, and it is for many, understandably, because it is one of the few routes directly to your website that still exist.
The sort of best ways of leveraging email are through something like a newsletter, which is a subscriber-based newsletter. So you're only really distributing to subscribers. A newsletter that comes from the founder or the experts that are also prevalent on LinkedIn and on YouTube, etc. The email content itself can be a lot more personalized, coming from the author, but can go into a lot more detail. And that's where you can start to embed certain offers and other more conversion-based content within the body of that email.
Obviously, the other channel that's emerged in the last couple of years is the LLMs. And of course, people naturally will produce content like blogs and publish that on their website. But doing so without optimization, of course, for the LLMs is unlikely to mean that you then perform better on that channel. Put simply, when you're going to publish written content on your website, like blogs, like guides, etc., there should be a level of optimization for the LLMs if you want to feature in that channel. And of course, we highly recommend that you do. When we're thinking about how you do that, there's loads of tools out there. Searchable is one that we've looked at. There's many others. It's now baked into HubSpot as well, with a recent announcement around AEO being introduced into their platform. But effectively, if you're going to publish content on your website, you need to be using one of those to optimize it for the LLMs, if that is a channel that you want to use. So you've got to consider the myriad questions that people could ask. Now, previously, SEO was about looking at keywords and factoring those into your content so that you'd feature for those searches that happen through Google. Now, the obvious difference is that the way people search in LLMs is much more question-based than you would previously have done in Google. If you think about the impact that has, that you know the number of keywords is obviously can be quite large for an organization, but the myriad ways in which someone could ask a question is even greater than that. So it's all about trying to understand the kind of prompts people may be using to find the kind of things that you're publishing. Using a tool like Searchable or others to track those prompts and understand how well you're currently performing against them, and then to optimize for them. How you optimize for AEO is a podcast in its own right. We're not going to go into loads of detail on that now.
Just add one thing to this, which really is something that can be leveraged across all the channels we talked about, but it's the use of research. So as we're moving to a world where the human is at the heart of content, or certainly should be, and AI is eating many of the different channels in its own unique way, having an opinion now doesn't really count like it used to. Everyone's sort of advised to have a contrarian opinion on a particular topic, but when you've got 30 or 40 different contrarian opinions, it's very hard for someone to understand what's right or wrong. You need your opinions, your arguments to be backed up as much as possible by some credible research, some research that's unique to you. We expect there's going to be a lot more focus on unique research. So obviously we've talked about what we would consider the main 4 channels that B2B companies should be thinking about through the move to more of a channel first content strategy. There are obviously others. We're not going to go through those in detail, but they could be things like Substack or Reddit. So there's 5 key takeaways from this. So if we start with number 1, that really is to think about the 3-step framework that we talked about earlier. What are the outcomes that you want to get from the channel? what is the audience looking for from that particular channel, and what are the various mechanics, the algorithms, the dynamics that are unique to that particular channel. Think about all those things before you start thinking about the content you're going to create.
Yeah. And number 2 is that the channels with the highest barrier to entry are typically where the highest opportunity is. So despite some of the challenges we talked about in this podcast, we'd highly recommend that you focus on those, YouTube specifically.
Third is that people, not brands, are the face now of your content. Your experts need to be the face of your content, and in turn, your company brand will get the halo effect. Ultimately, your individuals are the real asset.
Fourth is that original research is the last true differentiator in B2B content. So if you've got opportunity to, make sure you invest in original research to support your content program. So the final point is that we've talked a lot today about several different channels, and we fully understand that not every marketing function is going to be able to be specialist and dedicate a lot of time, energy, resource, and finance to be successful in all of them. If you feel that that's the case for you, then focus on one, maybe two, and do those one or two really well instead of trying to spread yourself too thinly.
So thanks for listening and watching. If you got some value from this episode, then please check out our other content on our channels. We'd absolutely love it if you became a subscriber. That would really help us out. And we'll see you next time.